Imagine yourself, a glass of wine in hand, gazing out over the unique panorama of the Aegean Sea from your villa. Birds are chirping all around, artists sing and paint, philosophers teach their students, and ships constantly arrive at the harbor carrying new goods from every corner of the Aegean and the Mediterranean. Civilization truly seems to be in its golden age. Then, beyond the horizon, you see a growing fleet of ships. First, one ship, then three, then eight, then hundreds, all heading straight for your shores. Who are they? What do they want? Where did they come from? While these questions fill your mind, the ships land, and before you know it, the land you considered the cradle of civilization is awash in blood. A swift wind of destruction engulfs the entire city, and you perish on the ground, never learning the answers to any of the questions running through your head. Who were these people? Where did they come from? And why did they put everyone to the sword? Fascinatingly, even after thousands of years and all the knowledge we have amassed, we still don't have a definitive answer to these questions. Yet at the very least, this week we will attempt to shed a bit of light on the darkness. Together we will delve into the mysteries of the Sea Peoples, those who sparked the collapse known as the Bronze Age collapse. In 1950, the President of the United States, Dwight Eisenhower, first used the domino analogy when he cautioned that the communist movements in Vietnam could, over time, spread into Southeast Asia, affecting all the countries in the region and evolving into a regional catastrophe. From that point on, the term domino effect began to spread in modern culture, illustrating how a single event can trigger a massive chain reaction. Keep this idea of the domino effect in mind as we examine the topic of the mysterious Sea Peoples. To better understand the Sea Peoples, we first need a brief look at the final centuries of the Bronze Age. Dating roughly from around 3000 BCE to 1200 BCE, the Bronze Age was a time of humanity's first major leaps in civilization, a true era of accelerated progress. Great kingdoms and empires rose up in Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Aegean, and Anatolia. Craftsmanship, maritime trade, architecture, and agricultural technologies advanced significantly. And in the lands we now refer to as the cradle of civilization, Anatolia and the Mediterranean basin, various peoples coexisted, sometimes in competition, but also in cultural exchange, rapidly evolving as they went. During this period, we also see quick developments in writing systems, Egyptian hieroglyphs, Mesopotamian cuneiform, and the linear B script of the Aegean. These systems made it possible to record governmental and economic activities and greatly expanded humankind's ability to document its civilization. Additionally, there was extensive trade between these regions. Tin and silver mines in Anatolia were distributed throughout the region via the ports of the Eastern Mediterranean, while large trade vessels loaded with grain from Egypt traveled across the waters of the Aegean and the Middle East. Although conflicts did arise at times, this was genuinely a period of prosperity in which science, philosophy, art, and commerce were rapidly developing. But starting in the 13th century BCE, dark clouds began to gather over these at once glorious civilizations. Some experts even say a perfect storm of social, economic, and environmental problems occurred during this period. For example, in his work 1177 BC, The Year Civilization Collapsed, Professor Eric Klein argues that the excessive interdependence of trade networks in that era set off a chain collapse. A political or ecological crisis in one place could ripple outward, impacting the entire region. We experience a similar type of global trade network collapse during the COVID pandemic. When systems get that complex, it doesn't take much for them to come crashing down. Adding to the disruptions in trade networks, long-standing dynastic struggles, inheritance disputes, and economic crises were eroding the foundations of the great empires. The Hittite Empire faced internal revolts, Mycenaean city-states wrestled with increased political fragmentation, and a series of natural disasters, droughts, earthquakes, and famines seriously weakened the resilience of these empires. Then, at the moment when these flourishing civilizations had reached their limit, during this vulnerable period, historical records begin mentioning a new actor, peoples arriving by sea. We see their presence most clearly for the first time in Egyptian records. However, archaeological layers of destruction in Anatolia, the Levant, and the Aegean are often linked to these mysterious peoples as well. Some researchers suggest that what we call the Sea Peoples was not one homogeneous community, but rather a confederation of groups of different ethnic backgrounds, which is a very plausible explanation. The devastation and destruction were truly massive. This is where historians closely connect the collapse of the Bronze Age to the Sea People's assaults. In this video, the most pressing question we need to ask is, did these mysterious warriors merely deliver the final blow to already crumbling empires, or did they directly ignite the collapse themselves? A new age always dawns, that's just the way of the world. Labeling it that simply is far too shallow an approach when discussing these events. The devastation wrought by the Sea Peoples was so colossal that we need a more nuanced explanation. Let me try to convey their terrifying impact with modern parallels. Imagine that one day an unknown nation lands on the shores of the United States, Canada, and Mexico. They demolish Mexico and Canada, pushing the United States to the brink of annihilation. But that's not all. This same mysterious nation then sails to China, topples it to its knees, and not satisfied, goes on to destroy Japan, and finally ravages the coast of the Mediterranean in modern-day Turkey before vanishing. And imagine all of this devastation happening within just a few decades. Impossible, right? Well, roughly 3,200 years ago, the ancient world experienced something eerily similar. In those times, the superpowers of the known world, equivalent in their day to the countries I just used as examples, were either annihilated or forced to their knees by a people whose identity remains unknown. Furthermore, those who were forced to their knees also eventually vanished. Because this mysterious group destroyed and looted everything in their path, leaving behind few records, unraveling their identity is recognized as one of the hardest puzzles in history. In Egyptian sources, various groups are mentioned by names such as Peliset, Cheker, Shekelesh, Denyen, and Weshesh. Some researchers link these names to the Aegean Islands, southern Europe, or the Anatolian coast. But a definitive identification is still not possible. Some propose even more daring theories, for instance, that they were the early ancestors of the Etruscans. Some of you might wonder, could they have been Vikings? But that's impossible because the Vikings wouldn't appear in recorded history for many centuries yet. If we delve into truly speculative ideas, there are those who claim they were Atlanteans from beneath the earth, or that they appear periodically throughout history to annihilate civilization, or that they marched all the way from China and then returned there. The scale of the event is so huge that one might even entertain more outlandish possibilities. Ultimately, a mysterious force emerges from the sea, overwhelms the superpowers of the time, and then disappears. This devastation must have caused such a profound trauma in the people of that era that even their religious beliefs were shaken. What do you mean, you might ask? Well, as civilization after civilization across the Mediterranean fell, particularly the Egyptians and Hittites, from whom we have the most records, people must have thought, why didn't our guardian gods come to protect us? Temple after temple was destroyed, our families murdered by these faithless barbarians, and the gods did nothing? In the aftermath, many of these great polytheistic religions began to crumble as we moved into the Iron Age. Whether it was a coincidence or not, it was precisely in that same era that the Abrahamic faiths began to spread more rapidly. The key region is the land of Canaan, and shortly I'll share my own thoughts on that. Never forget that deep traumas of any era can profoundly affect people's beliefs. You can see a modern example of this in the Middle East. If you investigate some foreign forums, you'll find that a large proportion of people whose religiosity is primarily symbolic and not based on genuine spiritual understanding are losing their faith because no angels came down from the sky to intervene. This phenomenon can happen among Muslims today, Christians tomorrow, and Jews the next day. As I have repeatedly warned in my other videos, if you haven't grasped the deeper essence of your faith, if it rests on mere symbolic images, someone or something can always come along and shatter it one day. Let me record this prediction in the video. I believe that in the next 30 years, events will occur that will cause many to abandon their faith and protest at what transpires. Again, this is because so many people focus on symbolic foundations instead of the core essence. And when those events happen, just like the old polytheistic gods who did not appear for Bronze Age civilizations, these symbolic beings won't appear either, and millions will lose their faith. Therefore, major traumas can spark vast changes over time, triggering humanity to take an entirely new path. The cultural and religious shift caused by the Sea Peoples may well have been unintended, but it happened nevertheless. Yet we still haven't truly answered the main question. Who were these people? Where did they come from? And perhaps most importantly, what drove them? Looking for these answers might not reveal extraterrestrials or warriors from Atlantis. But it may uncover something far more unsettling and far more real. The danger may be our very selves. The only great civilization that survived the Sea People's attacks and emerged afterward without complete collapse was ancient Egypt. Both the pharaoh Ramesses II and his successor, Ramesses III, struggled profoundly with these groups. Ultimately, Ramesses III totally crushed them. He recorded his victory on the reliefs in the Medinet Habu Temple. These reliefs depict massive fleets of ships approaching the coastline of Egypt to capture the land and a contingent of the invaders advancing by land through the region of Philistia Levant. The texts explain how Ramesses controlled the Nile Delta, preventing the invaders from penetrating further inland, and recount how the Egyptian army successfully repelled attacks from the land. Nevertheless, even though the Egyptians were victorious, the conflict left Egypt deeply scarred. The treasury was emptied to finance the war, and a great number of lives were lost. Those calamities led to internal upheavals and weakened the new kingdom in the following years. From the protracted struggle that two pharaohs waged, we glean key insights into the identity of the Sea Peoples. The reliefs in Medinet Habu, the inscriptions in Karnak Temple, and a few other sources give us more clarity about the different communities making up this group. Some examples. The Peliset, a group from Crete who fled and eventually settled in the region we now call Palestine. Indeed, the name Palestine originates from them. The Shurden, a group from around Sardinia near Italy. The Shekelesh, a group connected to Sicily and Italy. The Teresh, a group from Troy and western Anatolia. The Lucca, a group from the Lycian region in Anatolia. The list could go on, but the major region remains the same. These groups came from Anatolia, the Aegean, and the southern Mediterranean basin, and they didn't fight as one perfectly organized force. The records note that the attackers were visually distinct in their attire, weaponry, and appearance. They were a confederation, united in some common cause. But why? How did they coordinate so effectively to topple the superpowers of their time in an era without any means of rapid communication? Here, once again, the domino effect provides the answer. In explaining this part, I want to combine the views of historians with my personal analysis, because I believe the most logical explanation emerges from these shared perspectives. Think back to my recent video on what would happen if Santorini erupted today. If you haven't seen it, I recommend watching that first because it's directly connected to what I'm about to say. According to this theory, the explosion of the supervolcano at Santorini, known in antiquity as Thera, caused the downfall of many leading civilizations of the era or left them in ruin. When trade routes collapsed, thousands died, and ash blanketed vast areas. Agriculture ground to a halt in large regions. With the collapse of the Minoan civilization, also called the Minoan culture, the civilizations that rose in the following centuries inherited this destructive legacy. Where once a mighty, stabilizing power had existed, now a vacuum formed. For instance, as soon as the Minoan civilization vanished, we see the Mycenaean civilization occupy those valuable territories. Similarly, when the powerful states of western Anatolia fell, the Hittites quickly emerged as the superpower of Anatolia. But these civilizations, which suddenly rose in prominence, soon fell prey to corruption and internal strife. And as always, it was the ordinary people who suffered. Remember, Santorini was just one cataclysm. Do not assume that was the only event. The years between 1800 BCE and 1200 BCE, roughly 6 centuries, are often called a dark age of natural disasters, stretching from Turkey to Italy. The Avellino eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 1800 BCE, the eruptions of Mount Etna, the eruption of Santorini, and the Great Earthquake Storm around 1200 BCE meant that just as a region was starting to recover, another blow would strike. This constant cycle of upheaval finally drove many populations into desperation. Then, on top of natural disasters, corruption in the administration and a crumbling belief system, people start to do anything they must to survive. Once matters reach that point, religion, language, and ethnic identity lose importance. Everyone bands together with a single aim: survival. At that stage, the masses rebel against the corrupt figures at the helm. This pattern has recurred many times in history. The Sea People's phenomenon is simply a large-scale instance of it. Essentially, the ordinary seafaring people and soldiers revolted. And yes, they destroyed the city-states and rulers they hated, but their goal was not merely to burn and pillage. They also sought to flee and survive. That is why I find the stereotypical story that the Sea Peoples arrived, destroyed everything, and vanished. Too simplistic. Many of them did not simply vanish. Over the course of decades of warfare, some settled in regions they conquered that were saved from the worst of earthquakes and volcanic activity, much like the Peliset, who established themselves in what is now Palestine. Another record that backs up this idea comes from Egyptian sources. While Ramesses III defeated the Sea Peoples, he didn't exterminate them all. Instead, he recognized their value and assimilated them into Egypt to serve in the military or in artisan work. He aimed to turn the crisis into an opportunity. And although we see that cities like Ugarit were destroyed by these peoples, new city-states arose soon after, including Byblos, Sidon, and Phoenicia. Scholars believe the main period of upheaval probably lasted around 50 years, and the chaos endured for about a century after that. Because so many civilizations collapsed and literacy was severely disrupted, knowledge of the era is limited. Yet we see that once the Iron Age began, humanity continued on its journey where it left off. Let me offer one more intriguing piece of information about this period. Remember how I mentioned that some of the Sea Peoples, along with their families as noted in various records, stayed in Egypt after surviving their attacks and then eventually integrated into Egyptian society? In the 12th century BCE, some of them, specifically from the group called the Peliset, moved from Egypt to the land of Canaan, today's Palestine region, and founded cities like Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. Shortly thereafter, we see conflicts breaking out between these newly arrived peoples and the Israelites in that region. Supporting evidence for this includes the discovery of Aegean-style ceramics in archaeological digs in Philistine cities, warrior culture artifacts in and around Gaza that match Sea Peoples' influence, and DNA studies showing that some modern Palestinians carry genetic markers tracing back to Aegean migrations. Indeed, there are passages in the Torah referencing these groups in Palestine as coming from Aegean islands. It's worth adding a brief note. Certain historians believe that after their defeat at the hands of Ramesses III, many of the Sea Peoples were exiled from Egypt and then moved on to found what we now call Philistia, Palestine. Others argue that there was already a small Philistine Peliset presence in the region, but thanks to the migrations from Egypt, it grew and became a major entity. The truth remains to be fully clarified. Once again, we encounter that intricate tapestry of history. Let me make it more complicated. The exodus of these Sea Peoples from Egypt, some going to the land of the Philistines, coincides with the period in Jewish tradition when Moses supposedly led his enslaved people out of Egypt toward the Promised Land. Feel free to look deeper if you're interested. The more we unearth fresh data, the more we realize that many events we thought we understood may have happened quite differently. That's why questioning and exploring history with an open mind is critical. To sum up, in my view and in those of some historians, whose sources I'll list in the description, the chain of major natural disasters from around 1800 BCE to 1200 BCE dramatically affected the region. During this era, particularly with the cataclysmic eruption of the Santorini, Thera volcano, numerous civilizations collapsed with astonishing speed. Just as swiftly, new ones rose to replace them, only to become corrupt and face internal crises. Meanwhile, as people's homes and beliefs were shattered by widespread disasters, they began to rebel. In the late 13th and early 12th centuries BCE, a large confederation of these peoples launched maritime invasions across the Aegean and the Mediterranean, plundering or outright destroying existing powers and fleeing to safer territories alongside their families in massive fleets. We see that this uprooting and warfare lasted at least 50 years. Afterward, many among the Sea Peoples settled in places like Philistia, Egypt, the Levant, and Anatolia, forming new states. Some ended up in Egypt as forced laborers or conscripts in the Egyptian military, given land by royal decree. Others resettled along the coast of Canaan or embarked on further migrations. Although major ancient cities were devastated, Ugarit was one key example, new city-states soon sprang up, such as Byblos, Sidon, and a number of Phoenician centers. As the Bronze Age ended and the Iron Age started, civilization carried on. Additionally, the genealogies of the Philistines, the exiles from Egypt, and the Israelites show numerous points of intersection. Disputes and wars appeared between them. All this mass relocation and cultural mixing led to the undermining of older polytheistic systems. Many temples fell, and a new wave of monotheism, like the Abrahamic faiths and Zoroastrianism, began spreading more quickly through the areas that had undergone these changes. One driving factor was the collapse in trust. Where were the old gods to protect us from this disaster? As those faiths eroded, a more philosophical concept of a single creator being started to emerge, one that presumably encompassed all. Over time, however, this philosophical creator was also given anthropomorphic attributes, especially by the Israelites. So in the modern era, many still conceive of God as a literal figure watching from above. It's somewhat similar to how the Sea Peoples found that the old pantheons hadn't saved them. And as with any symbolic notion of divinity, it can shatter when tragedy unfolds. In the Middle East today, we can see another instance of people watching their homes in ruin, exclaiming that no angels came, and therefore losing faith. It's a repeat of what happened so long ago to those Bronze Age societies. As I stated, these disasters generate enduring transformations, like a row of dominoes that continues toppling others even thousands of years later. We might think the Sea Peoples phenomenon is ancient history, but its reverberations still touch us. Every decision, every step humanity takes knocks over yet another domino. That includes you. Don't say, "I'm just an ordinary person. What difference can I make?" Remember, nearly 2 billion people today follow a faith that traces back to the influence of a single individual's teachings. The independent republic in which we live was saved during a time of invasion by the leadership of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk and a small group of determined people. The YouTube platform on which you watch these videos, disrupting mainstream media, was founded by just 2 friends. Indeed, you are a single drop in a vast ocean, but the ocean is formed by countless such drops. Sometimes historical change takes time. The Sea Peoples' rampage and the subsequent rebuilding took nearly a century, yet it changed everything. One thing that did not change, however, is human nature. And the crisis that befell them so many centuries ago is recurring in our modern era in a different form. No supervolcano is erupting this time, but a different bubble, capitalism, is on the verge of bursting, and we are seeing the early signs of that in the massive refugee crises around the world. It's hard to predict exactly what society will be like in 50 years, the transformations in culture and religion, since we live in an age of information and communication, where changes that once took a century can now happen in a decade or even less. Regardless of how things evolve, we can say it's remarkable to witness the shift in real time. It shows that our civilization is still dynamic. Hopefully, you will learn lessons from the past and guide these transformations in a better direction, even if only a little. Who knows what the outcome will be, but maybe you can start the first domino and let time reveal where it leads. Thank you all for watching. While I presented the core framework of the Sea Peoples in this video, the subject itself is very broad and fascinating when you dive into the side branches. I believe anyone who loves historical research will be intrigued by this. I hope the information here helps you reach clearer conclusions if you continue exploring. If you've enjoyed accompanying me on this journey, don't forget to like, share with your friends, and subscribe to the channel.